Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Today is October 21st, 2025. Now, folks, during an NFL season, you learn certain things. Certain teams rise, certain teams fall. Here is my short list of the five best teams in the NFL, and it's a little bit shocking because all five are from the same conference. I believe there's an imbalance. From time to time, certain conferences have a leg up on another conference. What this means is that some teams who aren't elite actually have a shot in one of the conferences. The five teams, in no particular order, who I think are the best in football right now. And we're futures bettors, right? But you also want to keep this in mind for game lines. From the NFC East, the Eagles. Folks, they're the defending champion. Understand the offense has been inconsistent, but yet Jalen Hurts was capable of having a connection with both of his wide receivers. I believe they both had over 100 yards receiving this last week. The Eagles have a front line defense. I think they're one of the five best. In the NFC North, you have two teams who are among the top five, in my opinion, in the entire league. The Detroit Lions, and let me say, this year feels different than other years. I thought a couple of years ago Detroit was catching everyone by surprise by going for it on 4th and 2 and stuff like that. There was an element of surprise, right? I thought last year their defense was a little bit questionable after the Hutchinson injury, right? Well, folks, they have it all working right now, right? This is their best shot. Jared Goff is one of the NFL's best quarterbacks, right? The defense this year is one of the NFL's best defenses. They have many, many weapons on offense. In the same division, the Green Bay Packers, a team that beat the Lions earlier this year. Understand, the Packers have a feather in their pocket here. One of their games ended in a draw. So as I make this video, they only have one loss on the season. They're 4-1-1. So they actually have the jump on Detroit. Right? This is a team that has Josh Jacobs as their running back. Understand, a lot of teams in this league can't run the football. Right? I have my doubts about Kansas City's rushing attack. Right? New England can't run the football. Right? The Packers have one of the elite running backs in the entire league. And of course, Love is spreading the ball around. The tight ends are an integral part of this offense. Right? This team's been a playoff team the last few years. I think they're in the top five. Right? The team I personally feel is the best in the game right now, the Rams. Folks, there's only one Puka Nacua in this league. Matthew Stafford and him have a special connection. He's banged up right now. That's one of the biggest stories in the game. You need to monitor how he looks when he comes back, whether he's 100%, right? How the stars are aligning. Understand, of course, without him, Matthew Stafford just hit Davante Adams for 3 touchdowns in a game, right? These were short touchdowns. In other words, Davante, who just got there, already has a connection with Stafford, and I believe it's going to get better. Because on ESPN, Dan Orlovsky, in some of the best commentary this year, has been pointing out how Davante Adams and Stafford aren't quite on the same page. In other words, Davante breaks a certain way, and Stafford expects him to break a different way. So sometimes balls are a little behind Davante Adams. Right, folks? That's going to change. The Rams are on my top 5, the last team on my top 5. And the question here is, how is this quarterback going to play in late December? Sam Darnold and the Seattle Seahawks. Folks, the defense is rugged. Right? Sam Darnold has one of the best arms in the league. Now, I'm not a professional scout or anything like that, but let's just say I've watched him since he was, with the Trojans in college. Right? This guy has a great arm. The Niners were lucky to beat the Seahawks this season. Right? The problem with Darnold is the idea that some people believe that he sees ghosts. It's the idea that he fell apart last year with the Vikings in the playoffs with a team that had a very rough roster. Well, folks, in Seattle, he has a rough roster again. Right? And he has the defense. Now, let me say this diplomatically. Tampa Bay is very promising. I'm in a fantasy pool. I have some Tampa guys. Right? Unfortunately, in my opinion, the Mike Evans injury, season ending, has ended their ability to compete with these other teams. Right? Let me say, too, we're hearing now Ibuka, who's a rookie, has a hamstring that's problematical. You saw Baker controlled this last week. Right? The team's record is a bit of a mirage because a lot of their wins were late wins. It's not like they came out and dominated. No, they were late wins. Right? So Tampa, for all the magic they've had, for their great record this season, Tampa's not on the list. San Francisco, Saleh is a magician, the defensive coordinator. But they're without Bosa, they're without Warner. Right? Let's just say the offense, it's a story that's been covered up, but Jennings had an altercation with Shanahan. Jennings, a wide receiver. Ricky Pearsall hasn't been starting that long. Christian McCaffrey pretty much bailed out the offense this last week. I don't think the Niners are healthy enough to be still standing at the end of the year. Right? Now, if my thesis is right, what does this mean? It means that these 5 teams are better than every team in the AFC. I'm not that big a believer in Buffalo's defense. Right? As I mentioned earlier, Drake May doesn't have a rushing attack. Also, you know how I feel about second-year quarterbacks. Right? Let me just say, the biggest game, and it's the biggest game this weekend, are the Green Bay Packers traveling to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, the rested Steelers. Steelers played the Thursday night game last week. So you're playing the Steelers in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's rested. Right now, folks, I did place a bet on that game. I got 3.5 with the home team, the Steelers. But I need for you to consider the idea that the bettors, the rest of the betting market, felt that even a rested Steeler team is a 3.5 dog at home against Green Bay. Right? That's the line right now. That's how good the Packers are. So we're going to find out the lay of the land, right? I hope the Steelers, who only have a half game lead on Kansas City, I hope the Steelers are able to deliver and are able to win the game outright, right? Steelers are 4-2, KC's 4-3. Right? But understand, the Steelers blew a game against a backup quarterback, Joe Flacco, last week. Right? That game was so important. That game was in their division. It's over for the Browns. It's over for the Ravens. Steelers could have put the bow on the package by taking out the Bengals. They didn't. Right? So now they're dogs, looking at a losing streak if this line is correct. Let me say the best quarterback in the game is Pat Mahomes. I know there's some wise guys I follow. Steve Fezzik, I'll name him here, right, who believe that KC is the best team in the league. Right? Just understand the sentiment. KC's 4-3, but if you look at the point differential, right, they've scored 186 points. They've only given up 124 points. In other words, there's a 62-point differential. By contrast, the Steelers at 4-2 only have a 10-point differential. Right? If you look at the point differential, one would say, okay, wow, this Chief team with a tough schedule. Let's remember they started the season in Brazil, right? With a tough schedule. This Chief team has survived a lot of adversity, right? With a suspension, the Rashee Rice suspension, with injuries. This Chief team has hung tough. Right? My concern with the Chiefs is Travis Kelce looks old to me. It looks to me like he could be stopped. I haven't seen the vertical game that used to be a Chief hallmark. The offense to me looks like it can be stopped. They're also in a tough division. The Chargers made the playoffs last year. Right? The Chargers are frustrating to watch. They struggle against teams like the Miami Dolphins, for crying out loud. Herbert, I think he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league. But let's just say, the same way there are questions about Sam Darnold, there are questions about Justin Herbert, especially after all the picks he threw in last year's playoff game at Houston. Right? Denver is getting a lot of buzz in the press. Right now, second-year quarterback Bo Nix looks like he could be stopped. Right? Now, don't get me wrong. When I say guys can be stopped and I don't trust second-year quarterbacks, they can make adjustments. Right? They can figure out the defensive adjustments that defensive coordinators have learned to make against them. And they can then find a way to overcome them. Right? I've watched Bo Nix since his Pac-12 days. Excellent quarterback. Right? But at the same time, in his second year, Nix, who was getting shut out by the Giants for quarters. Right? I don't think Bo Nix is ready. Right? So you have a great defense in Denver, but you just don't have enough offense to make this their year. Let's just say I feel more comfortable with Jalen Hurts, who has won multiple NFC conference titles, right? He's been to the Super Bowl twice. I feel much more comfortable with Jared Goff, with Love, right? With Sam Darnold, for crying out loud, than I feel with Bo Nix at this point, right? So the Steelers and the Chiefs right now seem to me to be the top of the AFC. Chargers have a chance to right the ship. They just need to get it together. They're out of sync. I don't know what the issue is there. The Bills strike me as being on the same level as the Chargers, after 7 weeks of ball. So, if I get a prop, and these pop up every now and then, NFC champion against the AFC champion, and if I'm willing to tie up my money for several weeks, right, if that prop can get to, the NFC, not having to lay points, I'm going to grab that prop because I think this is that rare year where the NFC is much better than the AFC, at least at the top. Let me also add, too, that you have some really talented but volatile teams in the NFC, right? The Dallas Cowboy offense is one of the best offenses in either league. Unfortunately for Dallas, the defense is close to non-existent. In a league that has quarterbacks like Goff, Love, right? That's a problem. So that's the way I see it. Let me just say, too, Minnesota, I'm not a believer in J.J. McCarthy. I'm a bit puzzled how these guys who hand off the ball to running backs behind an A-plus offensive line in college are suddenly viewed as being able to throw the ball all over the field. I didn't see J.J. McCarthy do that at Michigan. I know Jim Harbaugh is high on him, but I didn't. I'm surprised. Let's just put it that way. I'm surprised. Let me say, too, Houston has the defense, right? I know it didn't look that way in this week's game, but they have the defense to be competitive. But they've also had injuries. The offense hasn't fully clicked. I recognize that there are teams not on this list that could make the playoffs, and depending on where the game is played, could cause trouble for opponents, right? I like the Jag defense. I just don't believe in Trevor Lawrence, right? I've looked at Trevor, and every time I start to believe in him, he lays an egg. Let me say this, too. The wide receiver that they picked out of Colorado, right? He doesn't strike me as an A-level wide receiver. I believe that's a missed pick. I know I sound hard, folks. I'd rather sound hard than soft. Okay, we have to make hard decisions here. Let's make the hard decisions. I did leave out a team here. There is a third team that can win the AFC. It's the Indianapolis Colts. Right? I'll concede that they belong on this list. However, I will say that the Colt defense doesn't statistically match up with some of the defenses I've named. Right? I'm also a little bit nervous by the lack of continuity. Right? Jalen Hurts has been with the Eagles for years. Right? Goff, he's been in Detroit for years. Love has always been a Packer. Right? When I look at Sam Darnold, I am concerned by the fact that this is his first time in Seattle. What that means is that You have a playoff game. You want the comfort of knowing that, your quarterback, Jared Goff, has played in Detroit before in the playoffs. He's at home, right? It's a little bit different if you're the new guy and you're in a stadium. Maybe you played there in the regular season, but now it's the playoffs. It's a little bit different, right? And your guy doesn't have the comfort level that an opponent might have, right? Daniel Jones, relatively new in Indy. Indy is loaded. Taylor is one of the very best running backs in the entire league. Jones is putting up Pro Bowl numbers, right? But the defense, I can't put them on the same level as in the conference. I'm putting the Steelers and the Chief defense. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your take in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.